Hey everyone, it's Kenji. We're gonna make some chili con carne. So, Texas style. So chili con carne, I mean, it basically is chilies and meat with a couple of other things. I got nothing against chili with beans. I love chili with beans, but that's just not what this one is. This one is sort of the classic original chili, which has no beans in it, no tomatoes, mainly just chilies and meat. So I'm doing you can start with powder if you want to. I actually have some powder here that I'm going to add to this just because my pasilla chilies I ran out of them. But if you want better flavor, you really should use whole dried chilies. You'll get much better flavor out of them than you will out of the powder. And that's because, when you grind something, you're increasing the surface area where sort of the volatile aromatics can go off into the air. And so ground spices lose their flavor a lot faster than whole spices do. Any type of chili you're making, whether it's a real chili con carne like this, or whether it's one with beans, it'll be improved if you use whole dried chilies as opposed to chili powder. That said, there's nothing wrong with using chili powder if that's what you got. You do want to find chilies that are freshly dried. So these are, they should be nice and pliable. If they're dusty or crack when you try and bend them like that, they are probably too old and will not have much flavor left in them. I keep mine in the freezer, so they stay, fresh for a relatively long time. In a freezer bag, they'll stay fresh for a year or two, no problem. All right, so what you see what I did? I'm basically just removing the stems, and if you want, you can remove all the seeds, but the way, you can cut off the stem and then shake out the seeds. The way I like to do this, though, is I just put the chilies in a bowl like this and then kind of toss them with your fingers. And you'll find that most of the seeds actually just come out on their own, so there'll only be a few left in there. And that's fine. The more seeds, the more ribs you add, the spicier your chili is going to be. These are relatively mild chilies. So I'm using a mix right now of chile mulatto, chile California, and then I'm going to use this pasilla powder. Like I said, I couldn't find whole dried pasillas today. So, all right. So I got these in my Dutch oven. We're gonna just toast them a little bit. Put it over heat. Let that kind of heat up, and we're gonna cook them until they kind of start to smell real nice. I've got a recipe for this on Serious Eats, by the way. I'm not following the recipe, obviously, because I rarely follow my own recipes, but I am following the same basic technique. Okay, so I got some meat here. This is chuck, so you can see it's got some nice intramuscular fat, those little bits of marbling in it. It's also got these big swaths of fat that are dividing up some of the muscle structure. I'm going to cut out just some of that fat because I like fat, but I don't want like these gigantic chunks of it in there. I'm just going to trim just a little bit. And then I'm going to leave this in largish chunks like that. And I'll show you why. If you've seen my beef stew recipe video, you'll know why I do that. It's mainly because it helps it sear and brown a little better. So if you cut your meat up into cubes before you start to sear it, it's difficult to sear those cubes because they, again, this is a surface area thing, so they have too much surface area, and so too much liquid comes out, which in turn means that, it becomes difficult to sear. Instead of searing, you kind of steam it. So keeping big chunks of meat before a stew or a chili or anything like that, anytime you're going to be braising a big piece of meat, I like to sear it while it's whole. All right, so these are starting to smell really nice and toasty. So I'm going to throw them into my blender here. Oops. Try and do it without burning my fingers. Oh yeah, they smell great. I'll get those last few seeds in there also. Okay. And in the meantime, I'll actually start searing my meat off. So a little oil in there, just enough to coat the bottom of the pan. So this meat, the only thing I've done to it is I actually salted it last night. I salted it on both sides, and then just let it sit uncovered in the fridge, and that's going to allow you to sear it a little more effectively as well, because the surface gets nice and dry. We're gonna fit this all in there. It's all gonna go in. I think we can get you all in there. There you go. And look at me crowding the pan. But yeah, like I said, because we're doing it in those big chunks, even crowding the pan, it's going to sear up really nicely. I'm gonna cover this just a little bit so that it doesn't splatter all over my stovetop. I'm probably going to save that beef fat. What I'll do is I'll put it in a pan and let some of that fat render out, and then I can use that fat to cook with. Beef fat potatoes, really good. All right, so for our aromatics, I'm doing some cumin. I like quite a bit of cumin, so it's probably a tablespoon or so. I'm doing just a couple of allspice berries, say 5 of those, and then a good amount of, this is Mexican oregano. Smells lovely. All right, so we're gonna grind this up in a molcajete. You can use a spice grinder if you want. You can use a food processor, or you can use a blender. You can use a regular mortar and pestle. I like using a molcajete or a mortar and pestle over a spice grinder, because I find it's actually, you know, once you factor in like cleaning and plugging it in and all that stuff you have to do with an electric spice grinder, I find that a mortar and pestle is just a little bit faster anyway. All right, that looks good. Doesn't have to be a complete powder. And then finally I'm going to, so I'm going to make my chili powder here. So I've got chicken stock. This I just happened to have, I had a rotisserie chicken the other day, and I made some stock out of its body yesterday. But you don't have to use homemade stock. Oh, I have this strainer in here because I didn't strain the stock yet, so I like to push the strainer down, and then you can just ladle out what you need. You can, of course, use store-bought chicken stock. It'll be just fine. All right, and now I'm just gonna blend this up. So making a chili base like this, it will vastly improve any chili you make. And you know, you can do this a lot more concentrated, so like don't add quite as much chicken broth in there. And so you can do a really big batch of it. And in fact, you could even add like your cumin, your oregano, whatever spices you want to do. You could add some canned smoked chipotle chilies in there. And then what you can do is pour it into an ice cube tray and freeze it. You know, if you make a big batch of it, pour it into ice cube tray and freeze it. And then anytime you want to make chili, instead of using a jar of chili powder, you got this delicious chili paste straight from the freezer that's going to come out tasting much, much better than anything you can do with chili powder. All right. I've got some garlic. We're gonna smash, 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 and smash. Okay. Relatively rough mince on that. Don't have to go crazy. Everything is going to braise, so like all these, garlic, onions, things are going to kind of soften up and break down as they cook. If your beef is going to break down, your vegetables are also going to break down. Although technically, I guess vegetables cook at a higher temperature than meat does. vegetable cell walls don't really break down until 183 degrees Fahrenheit, which is maybe 90 degrees Celsius, whereas meat will break down, as long as you cook it low and slow, you know, for a long time, cook it for a long time, it'll break down even as low as 150 degrees Fahrenheit. That meat sounds like it's searing. I'm gonna see what happens when I flip it open. See what we got under here. Yep, looks good to me. You see how nicely that browns? When you do it in these big pieces like this, it's like cooking a steak almost. Onions. I'll probably do another video sometime soon of, you know, a more sort of American style chili. You know, what most people outside of Texas think of when they think of chili, which is, you know, made with ground beef and beans and tomatoes. I love that kind of chili also. In fact, I probably make that kind of chili more frequently than I make this, you know, Texas style chili. But if you want to get into a fight on the internet, there's a few ways you can do it. One of them is to post a picture of chili with beans. Another one is to say that you enjoyed The Last Jedi, which I did. Or you could go onto the Italy subreddit and post a picture of carbonara made with heavy cream. All right, so I think that's good enough as far as our beef searing goes. Let's get the tray out. I'll let this cool down just slightly. Now, so that we can chop it up. So now, if I was doing just chili powder, I would do what I'm about to do right now, which is take the powdered chili, or the chili powder, you know, which chili powder is different than powdered chilies. Powdered chilies are just pure chilies that have been, dried chilies that have been ground up. Chili powder typically has other spices already added to it, so things like, well, you know, like cumin and oregano and black pepper and such. But I would do what I'm doing right now, which is toasting it along with our ground spices. Oops. And that is to bring out some of the flavor and get it into the oil. Okay, just a little bit. And then we're going to go in with our garlic and onion. I lowered the heat now, so I'm just going to cook this a little bit until the garlic and onions are very lightly softened. In fact, I probably should have added that, you know, the garlic and onion first and the chili later, just so we don't risk burning that chili powder. But as long as we go over low enough heat, it'll be fine. All right. So now let's take that meat, put it back on our tray here. Now we're going to cut it into chunks. So first cut it into strips. I like nice big chunks of meat when I braise things, because I like, you know, I like having something to pick up and bite through. So we're going about, you know, 1.5 inch or so chunks here. Chuck is your best bet as far as meat for chili or stew goes. You could also use something like sirloin tip, which is also called flat meat, depending on where you buy it. They call it sirloin tip in New England, which is where you know, I spent a lot of time. But they don't call it sirloin tip anywhere else for some reason. But flat meat works. You could also use something like top round or bottom round. Anything that has like a decent amount of fat. Brisket would work. You know, like especially if you can get point cut brisket as opposed to the flat of the brisket. But intramuscular fat is what you're looking for, that marbling. All right, we're almost done here. I think we've taken, what, 15 minutes or so far? This is one of those dishes where you do a little bit of work up front, and then you just let it ride for, you know, the day, a few hours during the day, and then you got a delicious meal with minimal effort by dinner time. All right, so this garlic and onions are softened. Let's deglaze with our chili mixture here. Our chili broth. Let's see if we can get a little more of that out. Rinse it with some chicken stock. We'll scrape up the browned bits on the bottom. Oh man, that smells real good. A few more ladles of this. I've probably put about a quart and a half of chicken broth. That'd be a liter or a liter and a half of chicken broth if you're using real units. And then our meat can go right in. So you see, I only seared one side of this. Two sides obviously of the giant steaks, but the cubes are not seared on all sides. But the thing is, we're going to get plenty of browned flavor from those two seared faces. But our meat's going to stay a lot sort of more tender and more juicy and succulent because we only seared those two faces and didn't really allow every single face to dry out. So I think it kind of gets you the best of both worlds. Then I'm going to add some salt here too. It is going to reduce, so I'm not going to salt it to its final sort of salinity level, but I'll give it a bit of salt to go. Get started with. All right, so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up to a simmer. I'm going to let it go on the stove top. If you want, you could put it in the oven. Set the oven to say 250 degrees or 275. The higher the oven temperature, the faster it'll cook, but the sort of more the meat will kind of dry out. So I would generally set it to around 250 or so, 275, and let it go for a few hours. But I'm just going to finish this one on the stovetop today because I don't have my oven preheated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it come up to a boil. I will reduce it down to a bare simmer, and then I'm going to put the lid on just to crack a tiny, tiny bit to allow for some reduction to take place. And then it'll cook. It'll take probably about, I would guess around 2.5 or 3 hours or so, but I'm going to start checking it at the 2.5 hour mark to see whether the meat is tender yet. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to tell when a stew is done when this is at that point, okay? All right, so I will see you in 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours or so. And here we are. So you can see a lot of the liquid has reduced because we left the lid cracked a little bit. There's quite a bit of fat rendered out on top of there, but actually, you know what I'm going to first do is I'm going to take a chunk of beef and see if it's as tender as we like it or as I like it. There is such thing as overcooking a beef stew or a chili. I like it to the point where the main structure of the meat has broken down, so it doesn't. It's very tender, but it's not to the point where all the individual sort of muscle fibrils are shredding. This looks pretty good. See if we push it, it kind of falls apart like that, but it still holds its shape. Yeah. And it's still super juicy. All right. You can see all this fat that rendered out of that beef because that was some very particularly fatty beef. So what we'll do is we'll just skim some of that off. Fat tastes good, but you don't want your chili to be greasy per se. Excuse me. So you can do it like this. Excuse me. With a ladle like this. Another way you could do it is just let the whole thing chill. You know, take it off the heat, let it cool to room temperature. It should take like an hour or so. Then transfer it to the fridge overnight. And the next day when you go, all that fat will be solidified, and you can just kind of peel it off and discard it. Don't put it down the sink, because this is the kind of fat. Beef fat is very, very highly saturated, so it when it chills, it gets very hard. So if you put this down your drain, this is the kind of fat that's going to really clog up your kitchen drains. So into the garbage, not into the sink. Must have swallowed something funny. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do here is, you know, you can leave it kind of soupy like this if you like it that way. I want mine a little bit thicker, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to thicken it with this, which is masa harina. So the same kind of dried, pre-activated corn flour that you would use to make tortillas. Okay, so Maseca is the brand typically that I find. I grab a little whisk. A little bit of this stuff at a time. Excuse me for a moment. I'm going to take a drink of water. All right. Sorry about that. I had a little kind of coughing fit. I don't know what's going on there. Something stuck in my throat. Maybe a chili. And this stuff will thicken it up just a little bit. It'll help that fat emulsify into it. And unlike flour, you know, you can use regular flour and make like a roux, but I like the sort of corn flavor that masa harina adds to it. Let's stir that all together. And I really, you know, if you're going to serve this with something like tortillas, then of course that masa harina is going to complement that flavor really nicely as well. All right, last but not least, to brighten things up, a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Just a dash. You could also add some booze to here. You know, some hard liquor. That'll give it a nice aroma, and it also helps some of those sort of volatile aromas from the chilies hit your nose a little harder. You could also add a little bit of hot sauce. You know, I like something vinegary and a little hot, so something like, you know, Texas Pete or Crystal, or even something like Tabasco would work. But we're just going to leave this as is for now. Let people dress it up at the table as they want. But let me get myself a little bowl so we can eat it. Little sampler. I like some scallions in my chili. A little bit of cilantro. That is good. All right. So real, you know, Texas style chili con carne. No beans, although you can add beans if you'd like. Basically just chilies. Yeah, you're gonna get some hamon and beef. It's a little hot. All right. Ready? Oh no. Hamon is over here. Over here. Right there. Good boy. All right. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, I will see you next time. Bye-bye. You know what I went and did while I was making this cornbread meat batter? I changed my mind and I added some beans because, well, I like beans in my chili sometimes, and beans are good for you and they're cheap. This is just 2 cans of kidney beans I added, and you know, these days with like a couple of kids here, it's like, why not get a couple more meals? If you're going to put all this work into it, why not get a couple more meals out of it by bulking it up with some beans? All right, so now we're really going to go though. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.